We're here today to ask for the media and the community's help in furtherance of an investigation into a subject known as Matthew Ryan Bucher. He is also known by an alias on the internet as Matt C. Perrin. Mr. Bucher used these various different photos to contact underage girls on the internet who on multiple occasions is believed to have had sexual contact with girls well under the age of consent in Kentucky. Mr. Bucher was arrested by the Kenton County Police Department after an investigation on June the 29th, 2016. He is currently incarcerated in the Kenton County Detention Center where he remains, and I apologize, I don't know what his bond amount is, but he remains incarcerated in the Kenton County Detention Center. He has been indicted in two separate cases in Kenton County. The first case, Kenton Circuit Court case number 16 CR 703, where he is facing 1 count of second-degree rape, 6 counts of promoting a sexual performance by a minor, and 6 counts of possession of matter portraying a sexual performance of a minor. Kentucky law caps the punishment for the total for all those crimes were he to be maxed out. The cap on those would be up to 70 years in prison. So technically the range would be anywhere from 1 year to 70 years in prison. Each of those counts of that indictment involves the same minor female victim. He is set for trial on those charges July the 18th, 2017 at 9 a.m. in the 4th Division of the Kenton Circuit Court, which is courtroom 6A. He's also been indicted in a separate case, which is Kenton Circuit Court case number 17 CR 026 for 4 counts of possession of matter portraying a sexual performance of a minor. That case pertains to images of child pornography that we believe to be downloaded from the internet. The investigation of the Kenton County Police Department involves a forensic download of various electronic devices that were seized from Mr. Bucher, including computers, cell phones, and the like. From those devices, detectives had recovered in excess of 60,000 images of child pornography. Obviously, Mr. Bucher stands the possibility of being indicted on additional counts then in the second case for the possession of matter portraying a sexual performance of a minor. However, during the search of those electronic devices, detectives have also discovered pictures that were taken with the same camera used in the first Kenton Circuit Court case for the promoting a sexual performance by a minor. Those pictures also portray girls that are obviously well under the age of consent in Kentucky. Our problem is now that we have been unable thus far to identify all of the victims. We are asking for the public's assistance if they recognize Mr. Bucher, if they know a female, especially we don't have no information at this time that he's got any male victims, so at this time we're referring to all the victims as female. If they know an underage girl who has had contact with Mr. Bucher, that they can either speak with the underage girl and see if she's got something she needs to report to police, or if they want to contact Kenton County Police and provide them with a picture, the police can compare the photo to the ones they've recovered from the electronic devices seized from Mr. Bucher and see if the photo matches one of the victims in this case. Obviously, the most efficient way would be to put the victims' photos out there on the internet and ask if anybody knows them, but that's not something we're going to do given the nature of this case. I'm going to now turn it over to Colonel Spike Jones, the Kenton County Police Department, for a few comments, and then when he's done, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you all so much for being here this morning. First of all, before I begin with my comments, I would like to compliment our Bureau of Investigations, Detective Downs, the lead detective, Detective Petaluga, and their supervisor, Sergeant Alan Johnson, for their diligent work on this case. Bucher is a bad guy. He's the worst of the worst. We don't know how many victims potentially that this gentleman has, how many people he's victimized. We do know they could go from as far as Dayton, Ohio to Louisville, Kentucky. I do want to mention Mr. Bucher. He drives a silver 2013 Mazda CX-5. And I'm telling you this for a reason. There are people that have probably been in contact with Bucher that are ashamed to come forward and report what happened to him. This is what we've seen in the investigation that Mr. Sanders just referred to. He commits these heinous acts on these children. Our victim's 12 years old. Children. He's an adult. And then he shames these children so that they won't tell on him. This is the worst of the worst. And I don't know how many victims, again, that this Bucher has taken advantage of. But what we're asking is if anyone has had contact with him, if anyone has seen him or knows someone that has had contact with him, we're pleading with you to please come forward, because we've got to stop this guy. And we've got to hold him responsible for what he's done to these children. And I emphasize, these are children he's preying on. Any questions I can ask? I'll take a couple of questions, and I'll turn back over to Commonwealth's Attorney Sanders.
How does this guy work? What's his modus operandi?
That's a great question. Thanks, Brian. What he does is he gets on online chats, gets on the computer, and he grooms these children online, develops confidence with them, makes them feel good about themselves, and then he sets up a meeting with them. After probably weeks or months of this, he'll set up a meeting with them. This is where the crime occurs, the real crime occurs. This is where he assaults them. And it doesn't end again with that. It doesn't end with that. He shames them after this. So it continues for the rest of their life until we stop it. But again, his motive is to build confidence through online chats and then eventually meet up with these young folks and sexually assault them.
You mentioned 12 years old. Is the rape case involve a 12-year-old girl?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Any idea if these are local children? We mentioned Dayton and Louisville, so these are obviously kids in our community.
Oh, they are kids in our community. And I mentioned Dayton and Louisville because that's as far as we've found so far that some of his internet work has reached. So, yeah, absolutely. But these are our kids.
Well, it's a reminder to parents maybe. I'm not that old. I've never heard of kick and beat me, and I'm sure most parents haven't either. Is it a reminder that there's always a new next social media that your kids are diving into?
There's always something out there. I've got kids of mine, and I can tell you right now, unless you're over their shoulder monitoring what they're doing. So it's I encourage all parents to exercise due diligence when it comes to electronic social media with their children.
You were mentioning that you wanted anybody who knew this gentleman to come forward. Were you referring to people who knew him and may have had a child who may have been a victim, or
Absolutely.
Just anybody who knows him, period?
And let me be a bit more specific. Anyone that has had contact with him, or their kids have had contact with him, or they may have heard or know of children that have had contact with him, that's who we're wanting to reach out to us.
So you're not looking for like his best friend or a drinking buddy or somebody that he may have
Unless if they have information for us to share to help keep him put away, absolutely, we'll talk with them. We'll talk with anybody right now. And we have a number. I'm going to go ahead, if I could give you that phone number. It's a special hotline set up just for this case. It goes to the investigators at the Kenton County Police Department, and that's 859-240-8548. 859-240-8548. And that's specifically dedicated to this case.
And he made these girls feel like they were dating, like it was a relationship. It's how he kind of reeled them in on this.
Well, I'll just say this. He developed confidence with the individuals he was preying on. I don't want to be too specific into exactly the exact techniques that he used, but he developed confidence with his victims and then would meet up with them and sexually assault them.
Is there any pattern, any commonality that you can describe amongst his victims that might help people to identify whether their children might have had contact with him? Was there a particular, do you think, a school or a group of kids that he kind of targeted? Or
Joe, right now, other than the age, I'll just leave it with that. He specifically preyed on minors.
Do you know how many other victims you're looking for based on the photos?
Based on the photos, and I'll turn this over to Commonwealth Attorney Sanders here in just a second, but we don't know. Multiple. And when I say multiple, we could be talking about 100, we could be talking about 1,000. Or we could be talking about 10, but one is too many. One's far too many. So, thank you all so much. I'll turn it back over to you, Rob. Thank you.
A couple other details of the case that I think are important to note that Colonel Jens reminded me of. Obviously, Mr. Bucher looks younger than he actually is. He's actually 29 years old, but he did, we believe, based upon this investigation tell his victims that he was much younger, that he was claiming to be 18 or 19 years old, and there were even occasions where he met the parents of victims and told the parents as well that he was 18 or 19 years old, when in fact he was well into his 20s at the time. This is one of the things that we know Mr. Bucher's done. Another is that he has either taken photos of his victims in various states of undress or engaged in various sexual acts, or requested that the victims send him photos nude or in states of undress, and that those are things that we think, well, that's obviously how we came to know that there were additional victims, but we think that those are things that Mr. Bucher may have used in the past to discourage his victims from coming forward. Which brings us to another point that I'd like to make, is just because a girl is now 18 or 19 years old, she still could have been a victim. If he had contact with her before her legal age of consent, or took nude photos or photos of her engaged in sexual acts before her 18th birthday, then those are still felonies in Kentucky, and there is no statute of limitations on felonies. We believe he's been up to this for several years, up to 4 or 5 years now. Based upon the evidence that we've discovered so far, we have, I wouldn't estimate, about 10 to 12 victims that we have photographs of that are definitely, undeniably under the age of consent, that we would like to identify. There's probably at least a dozen more that could be underage or maybe have reached their age of consent, that it's not obvious enough from the photo to us whether this is definitely a victim or somebody that maybe has just barely turned 18. It wouldn't technically be a violation under the law. But like Colonel Jones said, there could be countless other victims out there that we just don't have their photo or video, that we haven't recovered it, or that he never took one but that he's still victimized. Those people too should come forward. There still may be charges that are available regardless of whether there's photo or video documentation of Mr. Bucher's acts.
How did he come on your radar to begin with? At the first arrest, the thing last summer.
One brave young lady, I won't get into the details except to say that she came forward and that police were contacted. Kenton County Police were requested to conduct the investigation because of the nature and the scope of the investigation, and it has since, I guess, sort of snowballed from there. That as the further they peeled back the layers, the more evidence they found, the more crimes that we have evidence that had been committed.
Do you know where the assaults were taking place?
Thank you for bringing that up. That's something we forgot to mention so far. Much of the evidence that we have so far indicates that crimes occurred at Mr. Bucher's apartment that he shared with his mother on Grace Court in Fort Mitchell. That is not the only location. However, Chief Jones already mentioned Mr. Bucher's car. We believe that some offenses took place in the car as well. And likewise, we know he was transporting victims in his car, so they could have taken place anywhere. But right now, we have his car and we have his Fort Mitchell home.
Do you have any reason to believe that a lot of I've heard folks that troll on the internet for victims like this have associations with other pedophiles, either electronically or there's underground clubs, there's all that kind of stuff. Do you have any reason to believe this guy has other contacts in that arena?
Well, obviously, when he's got 60,000 plus images of child pornography and not all of them are homemade, he's getting them from someone. Whether that was with direct contact with another pedophile or whether that was downloaded from an internet website, at this point I just don't know. So right now we don't have any other individuals facing charges or named suspects, if that's what you're asking, but certainly there's a possibility that he was communicating with or sharing images with somebody else that could be anywhere in the world, for that matter, using the internet.
Do you think he was sharing these images that he took with other people outside?
We don't know, or at least we haven't gotten that far yet. That's something I'm sure we hope to answer that question before it's all over, but we know that he was getting additional images from somewhere that he wasn't making himself.
You mentioned that the initial victim showed a great deal of courage. What would you say to somebody who's watching this story tonight who may have some suspicion or may think that they know him? What would you say to them to prey upon them taking a step of faith and decision to catch this guy?
Well, it does take a lot of faith, and it does take a lot of bravery to come forward, but we can help. We're here to bring justice as best we can in this situation, and before it's all over, we will expend every resource we have to find out exactly where these images went, and if anyone other than Mr. Bucher has them, and do everything we can to pursue anybody else that may have broken the law as well. But coming forward, helping us fill in all the pieces to the puzzle will only improve the chances of, number one, that we can obtain justice for all our victims, but also to contain the situation and to do the best we can to contain the dissemination of those images, to make sure that we find out both how Mr. Bucher was coming about his victims, so that we can explore any additional leads that might come from that, but also to find out where these images may have gone, or if there's any other devices maybe these images are on. We want to do our best to contain any future damage, and cooperation and participation will only enhance the police ability to do that.
Is he employed anywhere?
Don't know in Fort Mitchell, the Montgomery and Fort Mitchell. Yes, sure.
I'm sorry. Joe, I just wanted to kind of go back to your question really quick about, folks coming forward. And this girl and her family were extraordinarily brave in coming forward. And what I would say, to add to Mr. Sanders' comments, is what's happened to some of these victims. I mean, it's already happened. But what they can do by coming forward is make sure that this doesn't happen to another child or another little girl. That's going to be their contribution to this, to keeping this guy put away. By stepping up, they're going to save somebody else, and that's kind of what we're asking people to do right now, is come forward and save countless other children from this same experience. So, thanks.
Okay. Unless there's additional questions, that's all we have for you today. I would point out in this array of photos, the bottom right one obviously is a computer doctored image, but the bottom right photo is one of the online profile pics that Mr. Bucher was using. The center photo on the bottom row is the profile picture for the alias he was using of Matt C. Perrin. That was another Facebook account that he was using under that assumed name, that had photos on that account that made it obvious that it was the same person using both accounts.
We use person too.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Person? I think you said parent.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mispronounced the alias. It was Matthew Person, not Perrin. Person. Matt C. Person, which is on the handouts we gave you. All right. Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate your help.